The Berlin Wall restricted the rights of East Berliners in Germany and brought about new responsibilities to help those in need. In addition, the wall forced responsibilities upon the guards to control the people and sometimes do the unthinkable. Before the Berlin Wall was built, East Berlin had been losing about 10,000 citizens a month, totaling to 2.5 million people who had migrated to West Berlin. People wanted to escape their restricted lives controlled by Germany and move to the West under rule of the United States, France, and Great Britain. Due to this massive exodus, the German Democratic Republic decided to erect a wall that no East Berliner would be able to cross, or so they thought. In the summer of 1961, German history was changed forever.
2 weeks after the wall was built, the United States government sent Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson over to Berlin to indicate U.S. concern and to resolve conflict regarding foreign interference. President John F. Kennedy felt responsible to send Johnson to represent the United States position. In October 1961, an American official stationed in West Berlin decided to test the limits of the wall at Checkpoint Charlie. The man refused to show his authorization papers when he arrived at the checkpoint, soon causing a military standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. During the stalemate, a U.S. reporter arrived at the scene to recount the events thought to be the beginning of World War III. The standoff lasted for 48 hours. The whole world was watching in anticipation. Washington and Moscow officials negotiated an agreement for both sides to stand down. This was the last time the U.S. tested the border.
In 1963, President John F. Kennedy flew to Berlin and administered a speech that touched the hearts of the world. As an influential leader, Kennedy had a responsibility to speak out and help the citizens of Berlin.
Freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in.
This demonstrated how Kennedy was unsupportive of the wall and that if a country has to build a wall to keep people in, there is something deeply wrong with their government.
All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the word, Ich bin ein Berliner.
This portrayed how Kennedy was supportive of the East German people, but not of the East German government. As a result of the president's speech, hope and motivation to fight for freedom began to spread among the people.
About a year after the Berlin Wall was erected, 18-year-old Peter Fechter and a friend attempted to escape East Berlin. Peter's friend made it over, but unfortunately, Peter was shot by an automatic machine weapon. While he was dying, German soldiers took him out of public view. This incident and others like it led to the wall being built up and expanded with extra precautions, furthering limiting the Berliners' rights. The new wall included a fence of barbed wire dug directly into the ground behind the east side of the wall. Once someone was over, the barbed wire alarms were set off, triggering searchlights and signals to alert heavily armed guards in the guard towers. If the escapee was not yet caught, they would have to run over rake sand, making footprints more obvious. Next were a series of wooden barriers set up as obstacles. The second to last section was known as No Man's Land, where attack dogs would run along long leashes. Finally was a 12-foot concrete wall which was painted white on the side facing east, making the escapee more visible.
Through graffiti, the West Berliners were able to express their feelings of hatred towards the East German government and how they wanted a unified Berlin. Guards protecting the Berlin Wall were faced with great burdens of responsibility. Due to an increased public interest of escaping, the German Democratic Republic's Ministry of Defense ordered soldiers at the wall to shoot citizens in order to take them down for arrest, but some took the order too far and killed when it was unnecessary. This became known as the shoot-to-kill order. Guards were also responsible to check papers of anyone wanting to cross into the east, and especially from east to west. They had to be sure that the papers were authentic and that identities were not being stolen. As seen earlier, this duty was taken very seriously, leading to the events at Checkpoint Charlie.
The following is an interview conducted with a family friend who moved to West Berlin in 1982 when the wall was still up. We moved mainly because of our studies, but also during that time it was a requirement for all male citizens of West Germany over 18 to join the German army called the Bundeswehr, whereas males living in West Berlin were not allowed to join under a restriction of the French, British, and Americans. It was not very difficult to move to our new home since by the time we moved things had settled down in Berlin and were more organized. As West German citizens were allowed to cross to the east, it wasn't very difficult. We just had to make sure we had all of our papers. We didn't have any friends or family in the East, but we crossed over a few times because we were curious as to what life was like there. It was a very depressing experience visiting East Berlin. It was difficult to see people like ourselves look so sad with such dirty old clothes. Buildings were falling apart and always smelled like rotten eggs because the dirty coal they used had so much sulfur in it. While in the East, we had to keep our papers with us at all times in case we were checked by guards. It was much more difficult for us to cross from east back to west. The patrol guards were much more careful looking at our papers, and it was a more thorough process. When the wall first came down, everyone was in euphoria. I remember how emotional it was to see people crying in supermarkets in disbelief of how many choices they had. Our rights mainly remained the same when we moved to Berlin, but it wasn't as easy to travel in and out of the city. As we stated earlier, if you were in West Berlin, you could not join the army. We also had lower taxes living in Berlin. In the East, the subway systems were very old, still the same from the 40s or 50s. Trains crossing into the West had to slow down so soldiers could check to make sure no one from the East was hiding on them. Many stations located near the border between East and West were shut down completely, and it was frightening at times to be around so many guards with guns.
The Berlin Wall did not have much of an effect on West Berliners unless they had family or other affairs in the East. Despite being contained in communist East Germany, democratic West Berlin still had access to West Germany and was able to import goods with the help of the United States, France, and Great Britain. On the other hand, East Berlin was essentially cut off from the rest of the world. Items such as food, supplies, and everyday commodities were highly limited. For citizens in the East, rights were cut off immensely. Although the communist system boosted the economy, citizens were not able to own their own land, and they did not have freedom of speech, freedom of press, or the right to vote. As the Berlin Wall decreased the rights of the people of East Berlin and increased their responsibilities to help each other. This time of crisis caused great emotional stress among families and friends unjustly separated. People were so desperate to get to freedom that they came up with dangerous and risky plans to escape to West Berlin. Both East and West Berliners devised plans such as hiding inside car seats or in suitcases, faking authentication papers, and sometimes going to the extreme by digging tunnels under the wall.
One man named Rudolf Mueller was working on the west side while his wife and 2 young sons were living in the east. In order to sneak his family across, Mueller decided to dig a tunnel nearby an idle construction site under the wall, then leading to the basement of an old apartment building. With the help of his brothers and friends, he slowly dug the tunnel under careful precautions taken to avoid being seen or heard by border control guards. After 3 weeks of overnight digging, they finally reached the apartment basement. As Mueller crawled out of the tunnel, prepared to retrieve his family and other young couple, he felt the responsibility to help. He was faced by an East German border patrol guard almost immediately. After interrogating Mueller, the guard soon pulled out his machine gun and threatened to shoot the family if they did not stop and show their papers. Committing to his responsibility, Mueller felt he had no other choice but to shoot the guard and run with his family. Thankfully, the family made the short venture safely back to West Berlin. Years later, Mueller found out that the couple he was trying to help were agents of the East German secret police.
Germany as a whole had a responsibility to rebuild after World War II. While the rest of Germany was fulfilling its duty to the country, East Berlin did not keep up with its promises. The GDA made it seem as though reparations were being made, putting up scaffoldings and setting up construction sites around buildings, when truly nothing was being done to restore the city. On June 12, 1987, Ronald Reagan delivered a speech in West Berlin that became very influential in the decision to take down the Berlin Wall. In his speech, Reagan spoke directly to Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Reagan felt that as part of his responsibility to speak for the freedom of Berliners, he demanded that Gorbachev take down the Berlin Wall.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Finally, on November 9, 1989, the GDR made the decision to knock down the Berlin Wall for good and give East Berliners back their rights. When Berliners heard the amazing news, the city was in pandemonium. There was sort of an unspoken responsibility felt amongst West Berliners to give those entering the city a warm welcome. Reunited families and friends ran across the border faster than any guard could stop them. Once the wall was taken down, the American, French, and British governments agreed that all East Berliners deserved the right to be given a set amount of money as they crossed to their new homes in West Berlin. Soon the uproar was calmed down and some minor regulations to cross into West Berlin were set in motion. The joyous feelings and celebrations of freedom continued for months throughout Germany. The Berlin Wall had monumentous impact on the rights and responsibilities of not only Berliners but of the whole world.